briefly go over some of the aspects that I feel makes working on a project like this a bit different and a bit special. Also ties into the idea of embracing the unknown, because we're trying to build something that I don't think has ever been attempted to this scale before. So what is it exactly? It's a massive open world online multiplayer space as a mouthful. Basically, we're trying to build a universe with multiple planets, multiple cool locations, where you and your group of friends can get your own ship, personal ships or shared ships, and you fly with the crew. You can do missions, you can do basically anything you would expect in a large universe. You can move cargo from one place, you can fight pirates, you can beat a pirate, and you can visit all these cool planets and locations. Just to give an overview of when I say scale and large, here's a snippet of our star map with currently what we've been working on is this planet and these 3 moons, which is part of this system, which is the Stanton system. And that's part of this whole thing. This is actually just a small snippet of what we're currently working on, at least in lore. What's interesting, if you go to our website, we have an interactive space map that you can look at, you can move around, you can click on all these planets, zoom in, click on these individual ones, and then open up like a little snippet that has information, a description. So that's actually a lot of stuff. Obviously, we need good tools and good workflows to get close to filling it out, but we'll see how far we get. On the other hand, like the planet, okay, well, so what does a planet mean? One of the planets, this is Daymar, one of our moons, and we see here at the bottom is first-person level gameplay where you have an outpost, you can land there, you can do all kinds of stuff, but you can also pick up your ship, fly from the surface, and you get this, until you're in space, basically fly to another planet. So it's a really big game, and a lot of ground to cover, which is why we had to do it in a very smart way, or at least trying to. Not only is it a project with a massive scope, it's also a project with a super high fidelity, or at least that's what we're aiming for. Our ships have similar interiors you would expect from a flight simulator. So you get in your ship, it's not you run up to your ship, you press F, and you're in, and you just fly away. Now you get close to your ship, you press the button for the ladder to come down, get into your cockpit, you boot up the engines, you interact in a way you would expect in a simulation. So that's a very detailed way. We want to get a very nice and sharp look up close in our materials and make sure that it was really nice and crispy. So our interactions is not just high fidelity from a visual standpoint, but also an interaction standpoint. So you interact with the actual buttons. There's very little menus, or most of them that we have are embedded in our game. And it's basically an evolution of the vision Chris Roberts had when he started working on Wing Commander. And as I was preparing for this talk, quite interesting, GDC posted a YouTube video that they recorded 20 years ago called GDC Legends. And on that panel was Chris Roberts, Bushnell, and Romero. And they were just discussing game development. And interestingly enough, when the question was asked, so what do you want to build when you think about your game? This is what Chris Roberts said back then.
Well, I mean, the biggest thing I always try and do in everything I do is I want to immerse the player in the environment. And so I think that what I'm proudest of with Wing Commander, or what I've done in the past, is any time that I sort of remove the feeling of interface. So, like when it's in Wing Commander, instead of you going over and going on File and Save, you click on a bunk bed to save, or you click on the airlock door to exit the game. And I mean, I guess the coolest thing from my standpoint is from putting it into something like Wing Commander and then seeing that sort of graphical immersive interface sort of permutate other people's games, which is kind of cool. But I mean, that's for me. All I want to do is I want to build an experience that I get lost in a world for 2 hours, 20 hours, 40 hours, and have a good time. And so I guess that's what I like the most.
So, massive scope, incredible eye for detail. We're driven to be, in order to actually get this game done and hit these above points, we're trying to be at the cutting edge of what we can get out of the PC. We have a very talented team of like super awesome engineers. They're working constantly on building new technology, new tools, and our pipelines are constantly evolving to do more and do it better. The last point, which makes this project kind of unique, is that it's the biggest crowdsourced project ever attempted, at least as far as I know within games. That means that there's over 2 million people who already backed our project and are looking very, very closely at everything that we do. And as we all know, gamers can be very vocal. That's kind of scary if you're an artist and you feel like, am I doing a good job? Well, there's a lot of people on Reddit who will let you know whether you're doing a good job or not. But there's also a lot of people that are super enthusiastic and give us a lot of feedback and positive energy to actually push and keep pushing. So we do, because we're an open development basically, we do weekly videos giving people insight in what we're building at that time. We have a topic called Lore Maker's Guide to the Galaxy. Now, the star map and all the fluff that's going into that star map, they share each week with we fleshed out this part of the universe and let's talk about it. Bug smashers, where we like to fix bugs, it's also kind of cool, and interview rounds and all that kind of stuff. So these are some pictures from Gamescom 2 weeks ago, where we hosted a live reveal of our 3.0 build and did a live demo. It was kind of cool. I was there, and it's kind of cool to see how far how big the group was that actually came to see it. So it starts here at the venue entrance, and there's a church in the back, and then it goes all the way around. And I was just walking around, like, okay, so even though we're still in alpha, so many people are already super excited and are really into it. The cool thing is that whatever we build is already out there for players to download and develop and play with. And just to give you an overview of how worldwide the enthusiasm is, at the same time when we were hosting our event in Cologne, this was a little bar in Korea where they were watching the live stream, hosted their own fan event, and because Chris Roberts couldn't be there, they actually made a little cardboard cutout, and just to have it there. So that's the level of that community involvement that we have. So creating a galaxy. I'm just going to take a sip of water. So we have a lot of gameplay space. And a lot of space that we need to cover and fill, and we want to do it in a high fidelity way. So there's a few challenges, especially, and I'm just going to focus on the environment part. A few challenges that we run into. One of them being, how do we render massive amounts of stuff? There is no background in Star Citizen. Everything is seamless and ongoing. So that's a big challenge. Challenge number one. Challenge number two is, how do we get all the stuff that we build in memory, or how do we optimize at least? The last one that I will cover is, how do we build all this stuff? I mean, there's so much that you need to build and actually have. Alright, so I'm going to quickly touch on this one because it's a more technical programming part of it. But we use drop call instancing. So we work extensively with modular kits, and if we reuse the same modules within the view, it will be instanced in the same drop call. We use aggressive logging. Now, logs are not uncommon, but we do add like 5, 6 steps sometimes depending on how far away we want to be able to see the asset and how big it is. And we use something called the lot merger. So we can select groups of assets and say, oh, at this distance, these will all become one new mesh. And if the materials all are the same, it will become one draw column. This is something that is done automatically, so we don't have to rebuild and combine all these meshes. It's something that is determined by an algorithm, and it just picks the lot states at a certain distance and just creates from that a new mesh. Just an example of our lots. This is, if you're familiar with it, then it's not that special, but just to illustrate how far we push things back. There could be another one here, lot 5, which would be almost like a box. Cool. So memory constraints. This is one where our pipeline really starts to shine. When you're building environments, there's like two big components that you need to keep in mind when it comes to memory constraints. One is mesh data, like your 3D models. The second one is texture memory. If you look at the 1K texture, it's 680 kilobytes, which doesn't seem expensive. But if you compare it to a 5,000 triangle mesh for this rock over here, you can see that's actually half. So geometry is actually a bit cheaper to have in memory than textures. Especially if you consider that a material, usually, in order to fully describe a material, you need a normal map, you need a gloss map, sometimes you need a height map, sometimes you need a spectra map. And then that 1K texture that starts to explode to more than 3 megabytes per material. It gets even worse if you say, well, I'm not going to use a 1K, we're going to use a 2K, then you're hitting close to 60 megabytes for one material. So we need to reduce the amount of unique textures that we have. So we use a lot of tiling materials. Another drawback of unique textures, and this is just a scant rock, just as an example, using a 1K material, which would be reasonable, but we cannot bake down for all the geology that we want to have on the planets a unique texture. So we need to find a different method for it. At the same time, if you bake down stuff for a unique texture, you sort of set the limitation to how crispy you can get stuff to look. So from here it actually reads okay, but when you get close, you can sort of see that the rock in the background, it's making it really hard to hit that fidelity that we want to have. So some of our solutions, we almost bake no unique maps. So everything we do is based on tiling materials. Like I said. That makes it easier to reuse the materials, and you can get like a much crisper surface when you come close. So since we don't bake our unique materials, we have to put the responsibility of the shape and the shading back onto the geometry. So our geometry will be a bit more expensive, but at least we save a lot of memory on textures. So sub-challenge, how do we regain this high poly, detailed look on our models without baking unique textures for each of them? So for this we use custom normals, which is not an uncommon trick, but it's one that has been gaining much more popularity in recent years. Basically, the idea is that with this regular shaded group, you get your hard edges, and in order to get that to have nice smooth edges, you would bake a normal map for it. Or, step 2, you would throw it in one smoothie group, and you have less vertices to actually render. But if you don't have your unique normal map, you would try to chamfer it, which is getting closer to this look, but you still have the shading of having everything in one group, so you get your gradients. Looks a bit weird. What we do with custom normals is we take all the 4 points that belong to this face and just align them in the same direction. So you get all the curve is contained in this little chamfer, and it's actually a relatively cheap method if you compare it to say, well, you chamfer everything so you add more triangles. that's not entirely true, because in the end, what you're processing is vertices instead of geometry. So if you consider here this angle, it's like three vertical directions. It's the same as here, and you don't need your unique baked texture to get like a nice edge. So here's some examples of how you, what kind of shapes you can get using custom normals. Just some boxes with some random chamfers and some more complex ones. So we don't need to bake anything down for this, and it's actually fairly cheap. Then the second issue is, how do you get those finer details back onto your model? So if you have your iPoly model, you have your bolts and panel lines and cool little details. For this we use palm textures, and yeah, so it is running cool. We make extensive use of sheets that have interesting palm details, and we have this as tiling materials as well as decals that we place on top of our models. All right. So this is an example of custom normals and our palm decals and palm sheets put together in one of our scenes, and it looks exactly like we want it. It has nice, high, crispy fidelity. It looks nice up close, and it is relatively cheap. Plus, none of these materials are unique to this specific mesh that we're building, so we can reuse and rebuild different things with it. Just an example of how it's put together. So you can see that there's actually a lot more geometry being used, because we have our panel lines and our chamfers, but in the end, since mesh data is a bit cheaper, it's not really that big of an issue. All right, challenge number 3, building everything. And there's a lot. We use a lot of modularity, so everything we do, from how we set up our materials, to our meshes, to our actual texture generation, we try to do it in a modular way. We use procedural methods. So if you're familiar with the project, you might have heard procedural moons. I'll explain a bit about that as well. And we use object containers, which is a nice little trick that we use to work on a lot of elements at the same time and reuse them on a larger scale. So it's another layer of modularity. So, workflow to work, we use multi-materials that have all these tiling materials. They describe painted metal, metal types, like little greeble details, decals, stickers, and with these sets we can texture our entire set of modular building blocks. Since we use these sets, it's really easy to make tweaks and have them propagate to all our modules. If this texture doesn't work well, we just update it and it will propagate to all the modules that actually use that texture. So here's an example of some of the modular building kits that we have. This is a very small selection, but it's just to illustrate that these are all built with the same limited set of tiny materials. We can do different architecture styles with different materials, and they're all built to the same grid size, so we can even swap out like the same type. So okay, door set A, we swap it out and make it set B to make it look different. All these sets, they snap together and they fit nicely together. And here are some examples of what we can build very quickly with these sets. This also works because we have our instancing and draw column merging, so that's why it's actually feasible for us to use all these smaller chunks and snap them together to build all these different areas. Here's another one. All right. Now, if you use this setup and you use the same modules all over the place, you might run into a situation where it feels like you're seeing the same meshes and same assets constantly. So we have a little shader trick that we do that allows us to change the wear and dirt setting on each module individually. So you can actually grab the brushes and just say, oh, this one should look a bit more worn down, this one should look a bit more dirty. We can do that by hand, or we can just select the whole group and approach it via code and say that, well, this whole container with these assets, this little thing that we made, it's very old, hasn't been used for a long time, so let's make the whole thing old at once. So we also have a general slider to influence everything within an object container. The modularity doesn't only work for our architectural assets and our hard surface stuff, it also works for our planet stuff. So all the rocks that we do use the same method where we build them in a way that we can quickly swap out material variations to create different looks. These are all done with a blend between two tiling textures, and you can actually build a really big set. This is an example of one of those sets, and just quickly run through the swapping of the materials. So for each planet we would basically use the same rock set at the moment, and you can quickly swap out the materials to create the different looks for them. Cool. So, procedural methods. This is always a bit of a tricky point because there's a lot of ways of interpreting proceduralism and procedural methods. We have millions of square kilometers to cover, and there's no way to do it by hand. We're not a super big company. We have like quite a few artists, but also a lot of stuff to build. So we have to do it in a really smart way. So we're using procedural tools to speed up the work. These vary from randomization of assets, quickly generating layouts using our modular kits to fill a certain volume by a set of rules, or scatter like a planet full of rocks. Being procedural is not the end goal, but a tool in the toolbox. I think that's an important separation to make. I have an example of how it looks like if we work on this stuff. This is in the editor, and this is just basically going through setting up a rule set for the scattering of our geology. So we can adjust like the amount of assets and brushes that we bring in, the scale at which they are, the variation in the scale that we have, the amount of rotation, how far they scatter apart, how dense they scatter. And we can also assign which materials they would use. So we can come in with a basic material, which is a checkerbox, and then based on which planet we are working on, we would apply the correct material. So there we go, material on the right. We're getting there. So the other thing that's probably quite interesting is that we have a separation between brushes that are collision. So there are larger layers of height behind it than if you drive a rover you get stuck. And we have what we call ground cover, which is anything like small enough for your foot to just glance through, which would also be where we put the grass and the smaller bushes. And this doesn't have collision because otherwise it would be too expensive to actually constantly do all the collision checks. We also have the option to determine on an asset basis how far they should be drawn, which in this case they're all set to the default value, which means that if you fly over, you actually jump in and out. Obviously for larger assets you would like to set the draw distance like much further. And we're just going to increase all of them at the moment. you see that it just goes on and on. Right now, like this is a flat terrain, but when we have terrain variation, height variation, there's a few more rules that we can use to further break it up. So we can slope a line, we can say if it's at a certain angle, don't use it, or this only spawns on this area. And because all these rocks are basically using the same material set, they're all instanced and they're basically drawn for almost for free. The triangle counts, vertex data not accounted for. Alright. Cool. So, object containers. Object containers is something that is making our life a lot easier. It's basically a separate work file that's containing a group of objects, or can even contain a whole level. And since we're building one seamless universe, we have to at some point bring all these things that we built together. So the only way to actually do that is to work on separate things and merge them or embed them. So each can be worked on individually. This can be a level on its own, or like a layer, and say, well, this is, you can export it as a single group, an object container, and that way you don't have to work all in the same file. And like I said, you can embed them in other object containers, and that way you create like a hierarchy of locations. So just to illustrate that, it's basically creating modularity. And we can stream it in and out. But just to illustrate that, we have several like cool locations on the moon, outposts that you can go to that have been built, or like a large landing zone, which is like a city. These are their own object containers, and they are embedded on the moon object container. The moon object container is then embedded on the planet object container, and the planet object container is part of the system object container. That's object container section. But this is the only way we can actually continue working on stuff and have it being a seamless universe when we export everything. Alright. Creating a planet. Now I'll go a little bit more in depth to what we're doing in Frankfurt specifically, which is a bit interesting because the tech is not complete yet. We're still iterating on it heavily. And it's only, the team in Frankfurt is only like short of a year that actually really exists. Plus the Planet Tech, the first iteration of it actually still has to go live for the players. So there are still some bumps and we're still improving stuff. But when we're building a planet, we look at the lore. We have our lore masters, our team of writers, so it starts with that. Then from there we give it an art direction path, so we look at the lore and try to find a visual style that fits this description of this location. Then from an environment team point of view, we look at the art direction and start breaking it down into separate elements. So what do we need to build? This would be ecosystems. I'll go over these in more detail. Asset sets, what kind of materials, and we'll put it all together. So, like I said, we have our team of writers, and sometimes they write a little snippet of lore. So for our moons, it's very limited. It says, okay, the name comes from the Greek god, and it's a hot place or it's a frozen place, and they leave it at that. So that it gives us a bit more freedom. And sometimes in the lore they describe an entire planet. So we have, for example, the planet Hurston, which is a planet that's bought by a family called Hurston, and they have a company called Hurston Dynamics, and they built large-scale ship weapons of mass destruction. And they bought the planet because it's rich in ores and minerals, and the whole planet's surface is being mined completely. So that's a whole different way of, like, okay, you need to take this information and actually visually represent this. This is a different challenge from saying, okay, this is a moon, it's a sandy moon, and let's go from there. So, speaking of a sandy moon, this is Daymar, and this is an early exploration of what Daymar could look like. So we take some satellite imagery, some images of cool rocks, craters, just to get an early idea of, okay, do we want to take it in this direction, that direction. After going back and forth with some of these ideas, from an art direction standpoint, we start creating these visual targets. So we describe how the large-scale global look of the surface would be like, and medium, and when you get really on the ground, like what does it look like and feel like when you're on the ground. And then with these images, we start to break down, okay, what type of stuff do we need to actually get this planet to look like this. So we sort of start looking at the rocks, certain shapes and cliffs on the skyline. And you start breaking this down in a few elements. So we have our global look, which is like the planet surface from space. Then we have our large-scale terrain features, which are ecosystems. Then we have our small-scale features, which are like scattered acids, rocks, anything that we cannot represent in the terrain, so it's too detailed. And then we have our materials and textures. Obviously, these always flow a little bit hand in hand. It's not a cascading step, but obviously this is the breakdown for it. Global view is usually like we have a diffuse texture, and sometimes we have height maps as well to define where oceans are, or like super extreme height variations. But usually we can get away with just a painted, hand-painted texture. We can do this in Substance Designer, or we just use generators to create a random cool look, or we sometimes go into Substance Painter and actually hand paint specific layouts and areas. Then we have our ecosystems, and this is the bread and butter actually of how our terrain system works. As is fitting of our methodology, it's a tiny texture. And it rarely happens that you actually build a large terrain, and you also have to make sure that it tiles. So usually you just take your 8 by 8 kilometer chunk, and that's that. You can build it as unique and as you can do really extreme things. It doesn't really matter because you will never go to the end of it, or it will never have to blend in on a even larger area. Just to give you an overview of what goes in our ecosystem, we actually have our height map, which is basically the terrain displacement. Then we have a normal map to help with the shading and the read from large editions when you fly over it. And then we have our splat map, which basically gives us a bit of control as to where our material distribution go, where our assets go. And then these combine into like our ecosystem. And this is an example of how we paint our ecosystems on a planet. So when we're working on this kind of stuff, it's basically a globe, non-stop, seamless terrain that we're painting on. Obviously going in and painting a mountain is going to take forever. So we use these ecosystem textures to basically paint in our features. So let's start with a really big brush, a bit of the cratery ecosystem. Try to get a nice breakup. This is all fairly flat surface for this moment. But then we paint in like canyon lines. Just start breaking that up a little bit more. I think that was something. Oh no, there's more. Alright, well, you get the point. Besides the textures actually describing how our terrain should look and be displaced, the ecosystem file also contains all the settings of how much displacement, which materials we want to have, which rocks and acids are scattered on top of it. So because we're working with tiling textures, there's another little trick that we have to avoid this tiling repetitive look. which is like a scale randomization of these tiles where it seamlessly blends with the other ecosystems and just offsets the scale. So we can basically set how the range of how far we want to scale this up or down when we randomize this. So this helps us to break it up and get rid of the uniformity. Okay, so asset sets. Since we're working on plants, we're working mostly on natural stuff in Frankfurt. So we have two asset types basically. One is geology, which is all our rocks, small rocks, big rocks, and our flora, which is our vegetation. Just to give an example of the type of stuff that we have in our sets. So basically these are the sets that we have built so far, trying to get like different shapes, different sizes, some unique features like these geysers, so these spiky rocks which are more unique in their appearance. All these sets use the same limited amount of materials, and they can also be reused and swapped out with different variations. Okay. And an example of our vegetation. So we haven't featured vegetation yet on any of our moons because they're mostly dead, but work has been ongoing on our vegetation sets because the next few planets will start having vegetation as well. These have a slightly different approach as some of the necessities for the vegetation require unique assets. So these are not completely 100% built with tiling, but they do use it for a large part of it. So we have our asset sets, we have our terrain shapes. The next would be to look at how do we describe the surface. So we can have per ecosystem up to 12 materials, which doesn't seem like a lot, but we do use procedural noises to actually blend materials that we do have. On the moon right now we're using a fairly conservative palette of the sand with rocks, sand with more rocks, some cracked earth, and some more rock surface types. And these are then blended in our terrain using the noises that we have.